fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and I'm your host today. It's Al Warren. So joining me, we've got a returning author. Her newest book, The Deadliest Returns, a collection of Miriam Bat Isaac mysteries, and it's June Trop. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Alan.
So, June, what's been going on since you were here last? Or do you just buckle down and write kind of a book every year, or what happens for you?
I can't say that a book a year is published, but I can say that I'm always writing. And in this case, for The Deadliest Returns, I wrote 3 novelettes, all about the subject of returning. In the first 2 stories, it's about a person who returns. They return to Alexandria during the Roman Empire. That's the 1st century of the Common Era. In the 3rd story, it's not so much about someone returning, but it's about something being returned. And so it's a little different story. But they're all 3 mysteries, and they feature Miriam Bat Isaac, my sleuth extraordinaire. Now, I have to confess that I didn't totally invent her. I based her on a character who actually lived 2,000 years ago. Most people believe it was in Alexandria, Egypt. She was an alchemist. Her name was Maria Hebrea, but that wasn't really even her name. That's how she came to be known hundreds of years later. She was not known during her time because she was an alchemist. And the Roman emperors were afraid of alchemists, afraid that they would synthesize gold and overturn the currency and their empire. And so being an alchemist was a capital offense, even for someone who came to be known as Maria Hebrea.
Right. Well, why did you choose her to be an alchemist?
Well, she was an alchemist. I had no choice about that. If I was going to base my character, Miriam Bat Isaac, on a woman who actually lived. And not only did she actually live, but I came to know her. Maria Hebrea, the real Miriam Bat Isaac. I came to know her when I was taking a course on the historical developments of concepts in chemistry. You see, chemistry, as it's taught, is taught from the point of view of what we know now, not about how the concepts evolved over the millennia. And that's why the course I took was so interesting to me, was the science of chemistry is so inferential. One inference, there was no direct evidence for this at all. But we have somebody like Maria Hebrea, who was a practicing alchemist, and I came to know her because of this course. A paper was assigned on a historically significant concept in chemistry, and of course I had no idea. Despite all the years in chemistry I'd had to study, I had no idea what to write about. So in desperation, after all the deadline was running close, and I was a very serious student, in desperation, I went to the university library to roam through the stacks and see if anything struck me. Well, I was gazing up at the heavens for inspiration. I bumped into a bookcase, and a book struck me. It landed on my toe and opened up to a page about Maria Hebrea, the most famous woman in the Western world for 1,500 years for her practice of alchemy. I could hardly believe that, and how come? I'd never heard of her if she was so famous. So I studied her for my paper, and then Over the 30 years that followed, I retired from my work as an academic and wanted to write about her. I never forgot about her. When I was standing in line at a supermarket or at a red light, I'd often wonder, what did it feel like to walk the dusty streets of Alexandria with the sun streaming down on my back or blinding me with its brilliance? I wanted to know what her life was like. And so that's how some 30 years plus later, I came to create her as the character, and I really began in earnest the study of Alexandria, everything about Alexandria during the first century of the Common Era.
Well, how was she treated being a woman and an alchemist
Yeah.
at that time? Did they accept her? Did a lot of people go to her for advice, or was she kind of shunned?
Well, remember, she had to keep anonymous. She only wrote, and I'm not sure that anyone knew her real identity. No one really knows. And by the way, that made her a perfect protagonist for me because I can make up much of her life for myself. The question is, did people accept her? Well, she came from a wealthy family, not super rich, but rich enough to have been educated. Wealthy boys were sent to schools, but my Miriam had a private tutor. So she was learned, and she studied the theoretical sciences of Aristotle. And in that sense, while alchemy later came to be known as a pseudoscience, even a false science, a science of witchcraft, during the time, 2,000 years ago, it was a highly respectable, if not secret science, where people really believed that they could synthesize gold based on the theoretical framework of Aristotle. And so you could regard it as our first experimental science in chemistry. They didn't have to worry about her being a woman because she wrote, and all of these writers used fictitious or historically significant names to keep their work secret from being plagiarized. So it didn't really matter. She was wealthy enough to have been educated. And here's the thing, I didn't tell you yet. She had a man she loved. And he was an alchemist, and his father was an alchemist. He was not exactly approved of by her family because he was illegitimate. And he was not a citizen of Rome either. So he was subject to all of the taxes which could plunge him into poverty and even slavery. So of course her mother had passed away. Her father objected to her relationship with Judah, but she was in love with Judah and would visit him, and so she came to see the practice of alchemy as it was conducted.
And so what mystery have you got her up against in this book? And how do you create mysteries for someone so far in the past in a totally different society?
Well, human nature is the same. There's still jealousy, greed, the desire for revenge, being hurt in a love affair. All of those things are in the nature of mankind. And so I could put those challenges to Miriam, even though she lived 2,000 years ago. Now there's a twist, there's an ancient twist. For example, the first story is called The Bodyguard. Now Miriam had a twin brother, and as Jewish as she was, he was Roman to the core. He became a gladiator. He became an illustrious gladiator, of course. I wouldn't create somebody, second rate. You wouldn't expect that. But he did become a gladiator, but he was killed in the arena of Pompeii, except he didn't really die. And he wanted to play dead. He wanted to be dead because he wanted to escape from his contract with the gladiator school. It was called a ludus. He wanted to escape from that contract, so he played dead, and he created, with the help of a friend, a brand new identity. But he still needed a job, so one way or another he becomes the bodyguard to a legionnaire. Now the legionnaire retires, and like many legionnaires, he moves to a lakeside in Alexandria. So he comes back. Now he has a problem when he comes back. Since he was so illustrious, he could be recognized. And he didn't want to be recognized since he had been declared dead and free of his debts and many of the other benefits that followed him as a dead body. But the other problem, not only his fear of being recognized, he was the same horrible scoundrel he was his whole life. And so he gets involved in a tough situation, and Miriam is there to try to bail him out. He is her brother, after all. As a matter of fact, he's her twin brother.
Oh.
That's the first story, The Bodyguard. He returns to Alexandria.
Oh. Well, so, it's quite a different life and time and stuff like that. So you still have to kind of really know the area and what people do and how they act around each other. It's quite a bit different.
Yes.
So that must take a lot of practice or study to get like the dialogue.
Well, about 15 years worth of study. I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks because my memory, I keep forgetting things from time to time. That's my own cognitive decay, you might say. But I have to confess to you, Alan, I live in Alexandria more than I live in 21st century. I don't even like the 21st century. More than I live in 21st century New York. So New York is okay, but the 21st century, no. So I'm happy to spend all my time, the time that I possibly can, in Alexandria. And I have learned the flora and the fauna and the government and the cultures, because it was a melting pot of three cultures. The native Egyptian culture, the Greek culture, when Alexander took over, well, he died before, but the empire, Alexander's empire, took over, and then the Romans. And all the time, Alexandria was a crossroads on the Silk Road from the east. And so they brought in the silk and all the diseases and everything else from all the rest of the world. So yes, it was a special place. The streets were smelly and the malignant neighborhoods were dreadful, poverty-stricken, filled with pestilence and desolation. But the city was also splendid, and that's the part I live in more than the poverty area.
And where do you get the accessory, the smaller characters around?
Oh, you do need those accessory characters. And like Sherlock Holmes had Watson, every detective needs a pal so that they can talk over their ideas with someone and get feedback. So Miriam lived in a wealthy household, and she had a slave called Phoebe. Phoebe was abandoned as a Greek infant. Unfortunately, because of Roman taxation, that really was a situation. None of the stuff that I talk about, except for the mystery, is made up. None of it is made up. It's real. And so Phoebe was taken into their household, and you might think as a slave she was treated terribly, but the Jews had very strict rules about managing their slaves. And so Phoebe and Miriam actually grew up together, and Phoebe became Miriam's older sister, her confidant, her advisor on everything from Roman fashion to everything else you could imagine. Now, Phoebe is a great foil because she does everything we really in our secret lives want to do. So I don't know where Phoebe came from. I think she came from inside me, but also the characters come from people that I've known. Their descriptions certainly do. We use our imaginations, but there's always a basis for our imaginations, whether it's the plot or the characters. And if I tell you about the second story is The Beggar, and it's about a very old friend, a man, a friend of Miriam's who left Alexandria suddenly. Not that he was guilty, but he looked very guilty of a terrible crime. And so he fled Alexandria to escape the arm of Roman law. But he had a loved child he left behind. And so as he's near death, he returns to Alexandria. He's not afraid of being thrown to the wild beasts anymore. He's not afraid of being crucified anymore. He's near death. He wants to find out what happened to his loved child. And so Miriam investigates and tells him on his deathbed what happened to his loved child. Now, I had an experience like that when my mother was on her deathbed. She asked me a question, Alan, that went back 40 years into our childhood. She wanted to know the truth about something. Did it really happen or not? And so I was faced with the dilemma that Miriam faced. I didn't know whether to tell my mother the truth or not. Did I want to tell her what did I want to tell her what she wanted to hear? Or did I want to tell her the truth? And so my point here is that that story of the beggar on his deathbed is based on my imagination, but it's really based on a dilemma I've had all these 40 years since my mother passed away. Did I do the right thing in telling her a lie? So in that sense, it all comes from us, but it's our imagination giving it a little twist.
So when you're writing this, are you careful about the violence and how you write that on the page, or is there a lot of action violence in that way?
Yes, there is violence. Some journals wouldn't accept the violence. I wrote a story about two gladiators who met after they retired, but one had a grudge against the other. And so it got to be a violent situation. But I had to prepare the reader for the violence that was going to come. And so I had one of the gladiators had to tell the reader what an awful scoundrel he was. And so I had him kick a dog. And when the dog growled back, he killed the dog.
Oh.
Now, that was violence to an animal, but I had a magazine tell me that they wouldn't publish the story. They didn't even get to the real violence, but the human violence. This was, of course, violence, but you do have to prepare your reader, and not all magazines and not all publishers are willing to accept violence. The only thing nobody accepts is violence against children. Sexual violence, certainly not. Abuse of children, certainly not. But not violence against children. Otherwise, it depends upon the publisher. It depends perhaps on the overall quality of the story. But when you have a gladiator in the arena, there's going to be violence. Roman society was violent.
And when you write the bad guy, who's the bad guy, and how do you get them into the story and write them?
The reader, the formula is this. even with a bad guy, the reader has to find something redeemable about the bad guy. So in the character of the bad guy, he's bad. And no question about it, Miriam's brother was bad. But there's always a reason. How was he treated as a child? You see, Miriam's brother, they were twins. He was a breech baby, and their mother died shortly after birth. Their father blamed Miriam's brother. His name was Benjamin. Blamed Benjamin for the death of the woman he loved. He adored her so much. And so, while I've told you Miriam's brother behaves as a scoundrel, even worse than a scoundrel, but I don't want to give it all away, there's a reason. And so, no matter how bad the character, you've got to give him some redeeming quality. Just like for your protagonist has to win, but the protagonist will win the big battle, but they have to lose something also. So the reader is satisfied, but not totally overjoyed. The reader has to be satisfied, but not overjoyed. So those are the ways I write, and I probably told too much, but listen, I told you I was going to say anything. Tell you the truth.
Well, that's all that matters, you know. Now, can I ask, I guess the book's out now.
Yes.
Do you run a website, or do you have a lot of social media or anything like that fans or readers can contact you, or how do you like them to do that?
I'd love them to visit me, and I'd love them to contact me, and it's very easy because my name is June Trop, and my website is www.junetrop, one word, junetrop.com. And there you'll see how to contact me. I publish a blog every Tuesday afternoon on life in Roman times, life in Roman Alexandria. I usually take a concept from the book. It could be a crater. A crater is a big vessel they used to mix the wine with water. The wine was too bitter to drink straight. And so I'll talk about the crater and show images of it. It's only about 200 words, but every week, and there are hundreds of weeks, of course, so I have hundreds of blogs in the past about a new concept about life in Roman Alexandria, about ancient medicine, about ancient law, the flora, the fauna, the climate, the politics, all of the customs, the cultures, the language. I'm also interested in where we get our words from and to what extent we get words. Our English words every day we have a few from ancient Egypt. So I'll talk about that. All of that's on my website. I have a June Trop author page on Facebook, and that's it.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's all you need. Well, we will put all of that up on our website so people can find you and the book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it, giving everybody a little bit of rundown there. So now the book is called The Deadliest Returns. That's the Miriam Bat Isaac Mysteries. June Trop, thank you for being here.
A pleasure. Everybody should listen to you, Alan. You're just as smooth as silk and as sweet as honey.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.